digitaljamsessions.com.
Hello and welcome to this Digital Jam special. Today we are joined by Oscar Clark from Unity as well as from Rocket Lolly. Did I get that right? Rocket Lolly Games. Yes, there we go. And we are also joined presently by Alex Darby, who is the founder and director of Derbytron Limited, as well as one of the founders of the Arch Creatives.
Hello.
Thank you. Now, we are hypothetically also going to be joined by Des Gale at some point. I'm leaving the door open to that possibility. But for now, we're going to plough on with Oscar and Alex. Now, this is a special edition Digital Jam because we are recording today for Special Effect, which is a non-profit for the games industry. And amongst us, including Oscar and Alex, we will be doing a Special Effects 24-hour marathon podcast sometime in October. Oscar, you're going to tell us when exactly this is all going to happen. And we want you, our lovely listeners, to join us when we do this 24-hour podcast. So we thought we'd give you a little early taste of what it might sound like when we do this very long, very lengthy podcast. But for now, we'll just give you a very short little bit of what it might sound like. So...
The whole thing about this is we probably ought to explain a little bit about the background of where it came from
Please
and
do.
what we were trying to do. So this all came back around a point where we had an industry conference sponsored by Intel, I think, at the time, and we pulled together this panel, and it's basically we've known each other for a long time in various forms and pieces, and we had this sort of discussion planned, but there was a gap of about 20 minutes before we were supposed to kick off, because the previous speaker had finished early, and we just didn't wait. We started talking, and I think I was moderating at the time, and I suggested some ridiculous. What do we think about are games worthy as an art form?
You was being controversial, Oscar. That's what you was doing.
But that's the fun bit. I was trying to. I can't remember what the actual question I said at the time was. Someone will remind me, but. Yeah, the point is, I'm getting fed up of just talking about things, about games in a very bland way, and this game is that, and this game is that, and indie games are good, and premium AAA games are bad. I actually want to start doing some stuff that's really awesome, and actually start questioning about. We've got this amazing art form that's evolving and creating all these concepts, and again, for me, this kind of comes back to why I wanted to do it as a charity thing. If you sit there, a whole bunch of people like this lot, like you lot, and we start chatting away, we find these lovely hidden topics. We find that there is a special effect that games have.
It is true.
That charity happens to be brilliant because what they're trying to do is make it possible for people who can't play games, who need adaptive controllers.
Hold on. Let's define what we mean by can't play games. And what we mean by that is people who have a physical or some form of disability that prohibits them from traditionally being able to play the game. So they aren't able to hold a controller, see the controller, or whatever else it may be.
Yeah, so imagine someone can't use their hands in a more traditional way, or they maybe have only restricted movement in terms of their head. Through, if you think about people who have physical or motor disabilities like that, the opportunity to then be able to play a game normally, using their own ability, to have that autonomy of controlling that game is incredibly, powerful. It builds a whole bunch of self-esteem, and we just think that's a fantastic thing.
Wonderful.
Yeah, it's amazing.
So we thought, I think that's a great way kind of to get people started. The dates we're talking about at the moment is we're picking a date during the MCM Comic Con, which takes place between the 28th and the 30th of October, and we're going to pull out all of the details of the particular 24-hour period that we plan to go. We plan to go from a Friday to the Saturday, so the 28th to the 29th.
Which means that hypothetically, if it is happening at Comic-Con, our lovely listeners and fans and supporters can come and physically support this 24-hour podcast.
Exactly.
And sit and gawk at us while we all yabber.
We still have the question, do we go in costume? I'm still contemplating going as Beast.
I just think that without the hat, you're losing something. Your hat is your signature.
It's true. I'll bring the hat anyway.
Beast? You mean like Beast out of the X-Men?
Yes, out of X-Men. You mean
X-Men? Okay. I might go as a human.
Alex, you're just so imaginative. So imaginative. Oh dear. So what I wanted to do though was go back to what we were talking about before I hit record because it was just getting so good. And then Oscar was very, very common sense of him to say, "Don't you think we should record now?" So I want to go back to this whole board games thing because, the reason I say this is because I do think genuinely we don't, as a culture in the UK, play board games nearly half as often as we probably should, because there is something very tangible, very physical about sitting around a table and just playing an old-fashioned board game with a group of friends, rather than playing something over the internet, playing an MMO, playing on your Xbox or whatever that other thing may be. But just sitting there with a board game. We were talking about Settlers of Catan or playing a board game of World of Warcraft or something along those lines. Not these mainstream, this sounds terrible, mainstream board games, but proper, deep, complex board games. We just don't seem to do enough of it, is my humble opinion.
There's not enough Avalon Hill out there anymore. So that's a really geeky, board game and knowledge thing. Just trying to have some credentials.
Desperately trying to show you have credentials.
Desperately, yeah.
But no,
did any of you guys play any of those old school Avalon Hill stuff? The really complex kind of strategic board game stuff.
How old are these games though?
Oh, 90.
I'm not sure that I did actually.
No.
Because I'm just cautious it may be slightly too old for my time. Maybe, I don't know.
Oh, I'm so old. I feel so old. I'm just thinking about all these kind of Axis and Allies and the original kind of board game stuff that I used to sort of love playing. And what's it?
God, I haven't played Risk for forever.
Yes, it's such an old. So it feels so old. There was this really complicated kind of mid-Napoleonic style or really Japanese style kind of traditional board games that you could get at the time, and they kind of lasted. I can't even remember. I mean, definitely sort of from the.
Are these the kind of games that you have to play for like a week rather than you can get through it in one evening?
Precisely, yeah.
Yeah.
Avalon Hill were eventually
Somebody bought their IP, didn't they, recently? Was it Wizards of the Coast?
Wouldn't surprise me because Wizards are owned by Hasbro, aren't they?
Yeah. Because I just googled it quickly while we were having a look because I knew I'd heard. Because my friend's like a serious, he hangs out on Board Game Geek all the time and argues about what the best X is for definitions of the best. I know he's always on about Avalon Hill, but no, I definitely haven't played it from looking at it.
One of the key ones that really formed me as a sort of game designer was something like Status Pro, which was the classic American football game that they had as a tabletop board game. And can you imagine trying to play kind of even any kind of football game as a board game, but let alone American football? It's kind of crazy.
I don't know. I don't think I can get my head into that. I don't think.
No, I think American football is one of the few ones that would work as a board game, though, because it's it's like a turn-based strategy anyway, right? It's not
kind of
free-flowing sort of sport. It naturally breaks down into sort of turns almost.
I'm just
maybe that would be a way for me to understand American football, because at the moment I'm not really clear on how it works. I have to own up and say that if I was at an American football game, I would be looking at the field very blankly.
It would definitely help. There's no question about it. I mean, I'm just looking through a list on like I say, Wikipedia about the old games, trying to work out how many of them I actually played. And Gettysburg, I've definitely had a play of that one a long time ago. But there's one down here which reminded me. I'd forgotten that the old role-playing game RuneQuest was published by Avalon at one point.
Yeah, I've heard that name in a while.
I don't know if that's a board game or not. It's been so long since I had that. It just drives me nuts. You just even thinking about it, it's hard to get your head around.
I think it's perfectly acceptable to not understand American football unless you're American. It's sort of baroque, I only know how it works because I had a cousin who had John Madden's football on the Mega Drive, and he was like, "Oh, you've got to play this game; it's amazing." And I was like, "It doesn't make any sense." And after a while, you understand.
I think it's
rugby, but more ridiculous.
Yeah, we see that's my thing. I much prefer to watch rugby because I understand rugby than necessarily American football because I just haven't really got experience with that. But having said that, to all my American friends and the people who are American who listen to me, you have an opportunity to teach me something new. So there you go.
Exactly.
But I have a question for you because I think this is a really important question when it comes to board games. But out of the two of you, who are you both parents? Do you have kids?
Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah.
So, as a parent, I'm curious, do you let your kids win the board game or do you not? This is, I think, a fundamentally important question I need to know the answer to. Do you let your kids win the board game? Come on.
I don't not let him win the board game, if you see what I mean. I don't.
That sounds like a non-answer to me, Alex.
I don't go out of my way to be competitive dad. But I give him as much leeway as I can without actively trying to lose, if you see what I mean. So,
how old is your kid though?
7. So he doesn't. So like if he's went through a phase of playing a lot of, or wanting to play a lot of the Pokemon card game, and I think when you're 7, it can be quite a long haul, that game. Like a lot of those CCG card games where you have to sort of put stuff out and then power it up and then send it into battle. You know, you're thinking sort of 4 or 5 turns ahead sometimes in order to work out what you should be doing. And obviously when you're 7, you're just like, Pikachu, you know. So he would get quite bored from time to time. Or not bored, but he's thinking short term. Like if I just get out my really powerful Pokemon, then that's basically I'm going to win the game. And so I would sort of sometimes I'd let him have, you know, pull cards out of his discard pile or something if I'm sort of in a situation where I'm clearly going to muller him, you know. But
well, in my case, it's a bit different because my kid's 16, nearly 17. So it's not a case of do I let them win? It's like, how do I stop them from winning?
Yeah.
But that means you taught them well. It means you taught them well enough that they can beat you.
Yeah, although we tend to play games like Dixit more often than not, or Days of what? No, Seven Wonders. Seven Wonders and Dixit are kind of the most common ones we play. Dixit is
zero-y, right? Like you sort of not directly combative.
Well, with Seven Wonders, it's definitely much more sort of like you're kind of collaborating, but you're kind of not, because it's a really nice mechanic. I mean, you have a set of cards, they have a set of cards, and then you pass your cards to the next person, and that goes round a couple of times. And because you can only pick one card at a time, you're effectively choosing what the least worst option to pass on, if that makes sense.
Yeah.
So it's a very odd but very interesting mechanic.
Okay.
I love the mechanic bit. That's the thing that I just think is juicy. Even when I was playing like World in Flames, that was a kind of classic. I can't remember if it was Avalon Hill or something else, but it's like a Napoleonic mega game that took like 6 weeks to play. And you go, this is insane. No one in their right mind would ever play this game. But it was brilliant when you could watch this whole sweeping series on. And it's most of the problem with it though is the rule, the record keeping.
Actually, this is a really good point. Is when you're playing a game that takes a while. I've had like board games out on the coffee table for at least a week at a time. There is a degree of trust that has to be inherent in the other people that live in the house, not faffing with your pieces and not switching cards. So it's like we ended up with this whole thing where it had to be a lockbox where the card stacks were in the lockbox because like people were reshuffling the pack in their favour.
That's just naughty.
That itself, that becomes like a fun meta game, right? Like the who can cheat without being detected sort of meta game is like, as long as everybody's up for it.
Oh yeah.
It can be fun.
Well, you need some recourse, though. I think in those, you need some sort of gaming recourse somewhere along the line.
Yeah. So what's the punishment for reshuffling the cards in your favour?
Oh, I think having them reshuffled again is often enough.
No, I don't. I think I think they'd have to randomly discard 2 of their cards and then just draw 2 or something. Because I think there needs to be because like you say, reshuffling. It just means that. It depends if I don't know, because you think, well, if they've reshuffled it, have they looked at everybody else's cards as well? Or, say, because I certainly, if you're going to reshuffle, you may as well, right? Because otherwise, you don't know whether you want to benefit everybody else as well.
Well, this is the thing: is you don't know what they've done. You just know that the only thing you do know is that they've potentially restacked the cards in their favour, but you don't know if they've taken a look at your cards or whether or not they've reshuffled everything or just the components that will affect them. So it's like...
See, I would never do it in the first place because I'm just too...
You're just too honest.
The magic circle's sacrosanct, right? You don't break it. It's the rules of the game. It's like it's a contract effectively, isn't it, between the players? That's why cheating's so interesting in a lot of ways. That's
why I like those games that have cheating built in.
Yeah, they're fun.
It's just awesome.
This is not saying a huge amount for our moral and ethical standards here.
No, but it is all. I mean, this is the thing about, again, it's about mechanics, isn't it? These little moments of play, these little kind of behaviours that we can define with rules and respond to with rules. When we start seeing how that affects the psychology of the person, and the interaction of the people around you, that's what we're tapping into when we do game design, isn't it?
Yeah,
I mean, that's what makes it magical, isn't it?
So if that is the case, and we're talking about behaviours and the psychological impact of games, are either of you going to own up to having thrown a wobbly because you've lost a game?
I used to throw wobblies like that was the standard losing. So my wife tells me that she thinks I might be a bit on the autistic spectrum. I'm not autistic, clearly, because I'm not. But she's like, some of the ways I behave. She teaches at a school, or was teaching at a school until very recently, that was primarily science and maths kids, like who have chosen to go to a science and maths school. And she said, like, everybody in the school, they have a very high sort of SEN component to and a lot of autistic kids. And she says a lot of the stuff that I do is sort of like I freak out if my basic plan changes and stuff like that. So I think, like it's not deliberate, but it's definitely spectrumy behaviour, more than average. I mean, I'm a programmer, right? And I think I've got worse over my professional lifetime. I think interacting with computers which have got no leeway has made me worse than I was originally. What was the point here, actually?
We were asking
throwing a wobbly.
Oh yeah.
We were asking about
when I was a
wobblies.
kid, I used to throw them all the time.
Oscar, as an adult, have you thrown any wobblies?
You're saying a wobbly.
Well,
it's like there's only one.
No,
I'm Mr. Grumpy. Actually, that's not too bad. It depends on the game. And it is interesting when you who you're playing with as well. So if I'm playing with non-gamers, I tend to. I'll have to ask my family, but I think I'm generally more generous. In terms of the way I behave, because actually the whole point of it is to get these people to have a good time, because hopefully we can get them into the little way of thinking that actually games are okay and board games are good. But
so you're being nefarious then in your attitudes by trying to draw them in.
Come and lure you into this little trap of a delightful game. Something like that. That's even more creepy, isn't it?
I think that's the tricky thing with games though, because it's not obvious what the payoff is. Like for people who, like they talk about gateway games, don't they, on Board Game Geek? Like, what's a good gateway game? How do you get somebody into board games?
Even the terminology we use is very questionable.
Yeah, druggy.
But that's always been the way. You look at most online services. I'm exaggerating a bit, but quite a lot of online services. If you step back, you realise that somebody's made a drug reference somewhere on the line.
Look, so I used to work on RuneScape, so yeah.
I mean, we were Wireplay. I mean, you can't get much more kind of drug reference than that, really. And that was BT of all places. So, but yeah, I mean, for me, the ultimate gateway game is Dixit. That's one I've had the most effective kind of transfer into the gaming scene, because it's one of those things that doesn't feel like a game to people who. It's not like Monopoly. It doesn't feel like those things. So it allows people to be more open-minded. I adore it as well, because it's one of those things where you can sit there and you can, I'm going to try and come up with the perfect phrase for my card, and it doesn't matter because somebody else might have another card that happens to fit that perfect phrase better. And that randomness, and yet still the sense of autonomy. So I feel I have autonomy, but in practice I don't. That's brilliantly engaging for non-players. Okay.
So here's a question for you then. When we're talking about these non-players that we're gently nurturing into our ecosystem and they are unawares, how important do you think competitiveness actually is?
Ooh, that's a big one.
Because I think you need a context for that question. It's so dangerous.
But I would have been out there. I'm really curious.
Because if we're talking in an evolutionary sense, right? Then obviously that's a separate question. Then I have to say, like people I play with, they say that I hate losing, but I don't hate losing. Like, what I hate is I hate not knowing why what I'm doing isn't working. I hate feeling like the game is unfair to me. Do you know what I mean? And sometimes when you lose, and especially when you play a game against people you've never played with before,
that's your personal perception. That's not necessarily the truth of the game.
Yeah, is that, you know, if you're going, well, I'm doing what it feels like I should be doing. Why is it not working? And when you're losing and you've got no idea why, that's no fun. I don't mind losing if the person has legitimately, if, you know, if we're complete equals and the person's outthought me, then losing to me at that point is absolutely fine, because it just means I wasn't doing as well as I could have been or whatever. But if I feel like the system is somehow, you know, betraying me, and even if, see, I often feel like that because I don't know the system. So in some ways I'm sort of default bad loser, I guess. But see, I think it's not necessarily the same thing as being competitive. Do you know what I mean?
Yeah.
I
It's
think
an interesting one, because competitive, I mean, if you look at the kind of competitive behavior like leaderboards and stuff like that, which we all assume are integral to kind of computer gaming, the people who are motivated by that, it's like 10% of the population.
Exactly. This is what I mean is that there is this misconception that actually the more aggressive you force your players to be when it comes to performance and behaviour, so things like leaderboards, as a for example, people seem to presume that this is a good thing, and actually what it does is it puts off certainly the newer folk and the people who are still kind of getting their head around whatever the game is, are looking at that and just saying, you know, I'm never going to accomplish that. I'm never going to be on that leaderboard. Why should I bother?
Yeah.
But that's the thing, it's like attainable leaderboards. This is why I think Candy Crush is such an important kind of step. When I could see the leaderboard of my friends on the thing I've just done, that's pretty powerful. Because I've got an instant reward. I'm 7th or 8th or whatever on the list most of the time. And therefore, I know I've got to do a bit better to beat these people. And it also tells me that my friends were here in the same space doing the same thing I was doing. And that idea of actually, instead, you know, competing against the world is impossible. Who cares? Competing against the 5 or 6 people that you care about, meaningful as anything, because it's not necessarily the one-upmanship. It's about the sort of engaging participation. So competition is vital, but it's a component. It's like one of the many colours in our palette.
Okay.
And I think from the point of view, is competition necessary for people to want to play? Like, do you need to be competitive in order to find games fun in the first place? That's a really interesting question, because I'm not sure, because I can't tell. Like, I'm one of those people who, like, I like games that have got like a well-structured set of things for you to achieve, so that you know whether you've done what you should have in order to pass or fail essentially like the test. And that makes it sound like I'm broken.
But there is a spectrum to gaming. There is a spectrum.
Challenge needs, you know, the game is, it's not a game if it hasn't got challenge. If it hasn't got challenge, you can't exhibit competence.
Yeah.
It's all about progression. You've got to have some form of progression in there somewhere, right?
Totally. So you set of you know, you give people a set of constraints, and you say, within this set of constraints, achieve this thing. Right? For me, that's sort of like fundamentally what game is. You know, that's not to say that things that aren't that don't count as game, but, you know, because I think there's a lot of games out there that are essentially you kind of setting your own goals within the parameters of the system, rather than the system saying do this. You know, but personally, I don't deal well with games that don't have specific things to do. I'm like, there's too much to do. I don't know what I'm supposed to be doing. You know?
Okay, Alex, you're being way too vague and way too bland, so I'm going to call it. I'm going to say, name one of these games.
Name the game.
Of which type?
Well, name a game that you don't like, and name.
Okay, so that's straightforward. So like, any sandbox game like GTA, I just find it baffling and confusing. Anything where there's too many options, like even RPGs, like I'm quite into sort of stuff with skill trees. I mean, man, I could go off on one for hours about this exact topic.
You're going to hate No Man's Sky. I love it for the very reason that you hate them.
I might not hate it. That's the weird thing. Is like because in that, like, the purpose is notionally to get to the middle of the universe or something, right?
Not really. It's
but
just to get a bigger ship, really.
Just trundle about. Yeah, maybe I would hate it. I don't know.
Yeah, it's very generalistically exploration. I mean, the whole mission to get to the center of the universe thing is a kind of a bit of a loose mission there. It's not like something's going to pop up and you say, hey, by the way, you need to get your butt moving. You know,
exactly. I absolutely adore it. I mean, I genuinely think it's an amazing thing for the very reasons that you seem to hate it. You know, I have no one telling me.
I haven't said that I hate it.
Oh, no. I've not hate it.
No Man's Sky is very definitely on my to-do list. I'm just waiting for it to not be full price, and I think generally, if the internet's shouting about something, I'm sort of the opposite of an early adopter for most things. I sort of late adopt things, because generally, you know, I'm completely ambivalent. I don't know one way or the other. The idea of No Man's Sky makes me excited. So, absolutely. You know, and so I'm sort of like, well, if the whole universe is shouting about it, and there's sort of this chance that they're gonna make some fundamental changes to it at some point in the near future, maybe I'll just leave it till they've done that.
But I
you
have
know.
a fundamental question, and maybe we're going to get a little bit too political here, but I am really curious, Oscar, since you are playing No Man's Sky, obviously when they first kind of launched the game, there was this whole idea that you would be exploring this, vast universe and, a quintillion, 19 quintillion planets to explore, etc. and so forth. But there was always this vague possibility that you would be able to bump into another player and proactively interact with another player and explore with another player. And obviously that has now been established to never be a possibility that you will ever meet another player. So for you, as somebody who is potentially playing this game and you're thinking, maybe I'll bump into somebody and we'll, get a crew together and we'll, be Eve online, and have a crew and have a big ship. And now it's kind of you're stuck in space on your own forever. Do you kind of feel like you've been sold to a little bit, or?
This is a really interesting one because I like to think of myself as Mr. Multiplayer, given that I've been doing like online gaming services since '98,
Mm-hmm.
and I've been building game communities and game services that are all about getting people together and multiplayer and persistent worlds. And I really like the massively online single player game. I really like not having to be fussed with anybody else.
I don't like other people who I don't know.
I love all those games, don't get me wrong, but I love the fact that this isn't that.
Okay.
And I know that's... sorry.
Why are you apologising?
Because Alex was... I was in the middle of saying something and I could have talked over him. I didn't mean to.
No, it's absolutely fine. I accidentally done that about 4 times so far, so don't know.
We're keeping a tally. Oscar, you're terrible.
I'm terrible. I'm terrible. No, but the thing is, and I wouldn't mind having the presence in a sort of Dark Soulsy kind of way and seeing creatures other people have named and all that kind of stuff. That would be great. But I don't need to have another player there because to me this is watching the paint dry, kind of just. I'm just existing and meditating my way through, and when you're sitting there and you're mining aluminium and it's exploding all over the place, it's incredibly satisfying. And I think there's this biological kind of aspect to all this. So, we were talking about competitive things. Of course, we want competition because play is a biological behaviour, that all mammals do, and part of it's about establishing hierarchy. Part of it is about practicing skills. Part of it is about just being able to set yourself aside from the other things that you feel you should do, and all of these things are perfectly valid motivations to play. And I things like No Man's Sky, the sandbox games that Alex clearly hates.
I've gone from I'm not a big fan of them.
I'm being horrid, sorry.
No.
But you know what I mean. There's a different mode of play in all of these things, and all of the above count. I will chat one thing, something I go on about endlessly, and this is not about quality at all, because Monument Valley is one of the best experiences I've played, but it's not a game.
Okay.
It's a puzzle.
Okay.
It's a puzzle. And I know that's pedantic and silly, but from
what's the differentiation?
No, because there is only one part of the screen I can press, and only in one way. So there's no choice. There's no autonomy in Monument Valley. It's all the autonomy in No Man's Sky. There's no autonomy in Monument Valley. That does detract from it as
Did you play the later? Did you play the expansion pack?
I have to admit, I didn't.
See, because to an extent I'd agree with you, because one of the pure pieces of genius about that game, I mean, apart from everything, because it's that's in my top 3 perfect things of all time, right? But if you ignore that, it's not just from I enjoyed it, but from every other angle, there's almost nothing wrong with it. Like, it's so good, you can almost not fault a thing. Like, other than, like you say, it's when you're solving the early puzzles, what's genius about it is it makes you feel like a genius. But there's really only one way through each level, and you will find it by trial and error. But it makes you feel like a genius. But in the expansion pack, they changed that, and some of the later levels are actually kind of pretty, well, not intellectually taxing, but you do have to. It's not just like shuffle it about until you win.
The irony is I bought it but haven't actually played it yet.
Some of them are really cool, and there's some. But the reason I love that game so much is because for every idea that they had for how to make the perspective do something interesting for a new part of a puzzle, they never just do more of the same. It's always just like, there'll be what you did before, small incremental change to make it, a new thing you haven't seen per level, and they just keep doing that all the way. you never repeat stuff. You never get to the point where you think, oh, I'm just trudging through this. This is boring.
Totally agree. And it is beautiful in every other
Yeah, and I love the way there's baddies in it as well, but the baddies can't hurt you.
Yeah.
That's just genius. The crows are just like, they're honestly one of the most amazing bits of design ever, I think, because you at the one point you're a little bit scared of them because they're sort of dark and go, but they don't hurt you.
No.
You can't die, and it's just, that is just so clever.
So here's a question I have. I want to know what your favourite game is, or the game that is on your I have to play this through to the end list. Because there are some games that, are great and we play them, but you never actually finish the damn thing. And then there's others where it's just, I need to play this thing to the bitter end. So what is that game that, for you, that is all about, that I need to finish this game?
For me or for Oscar?
Both of you.
This is so tough. For me, it's the next game I'm going to play. It's always that. That's the cop-out answer.
Name a game. Come on.
Skyrim is one of those things where I always think I'm going to go back to. I'll give you this problem I have is I do this all the time. I get totally obsessed. So the classic one is Fallout 4. And I'm playing, Fallout 4 and The Witcher 3, just astoundingly good games. Fallout 4, the problem I have with Fallout 4 is I don't like the endings. So, and I want to keep playing this game. I want to play this game for years. And I will go get all the, I haven't got around to it. But the reason I haven't got around to getting the DLC for that is I don't like the endings. And I'm kind of angry at the endings because I don't want to have to be the evil marauder, because that's who you actually are. You're just murdering everybody. You have no option but to murder everybody.
Okay.
And that annoys me. And I want to play this game, and I love it to bits. And it would be the game I would say is the thing I want most. But I can't finish it.
Okay. What about you, Alex? What's on your list?
I'm a bit like Oscar in that whatever the game, I tend to play a game until I've finished it. There's very few games I put down before the end, but so like the game that I always like, the game I'm most looking forward to at the moment is whatever the new Zelda game is. Basically, like I wouldn't say I'm a Nintendo fanboy, but Zelda to me is like it's like the archetypal perfect little chunk of hero's journey.
Okay.
It's like I think deep down inside me, like when I was a little kid, I must have read loads of King Arthur or something, and that whole person saving everybody, like Harry Potter.
It's the classic fantasy story. That's what you're talking about here.
Yeah, and it's just it's just the person who had at the expense of their own.
It's the hero's journey.
Yeah, and I love Zelda for that. I mean, there've been more and less perfect ones, and I know a lot of people don't really like it because ultimately it's the same game most of the time, sort of dressed up a bit. But they generally do enough to make it good. Like there's only been 2 or 3 of them that I haven't like fully enjoyed all the way.
Okay.
My trouble is it's about the only game I would buy a Nintendo for, so I wouldn't have anything to play.
You just have a one game console.
And I don't mean anything badly about Nintendo. I just want them to be a software company. That's just me being me. But
do you know what, dude? I completely 100% agree. I think, but that I don't know.
Peripherals as well.
You just want a bit of everything,
wouldn't they? For whatever it was they were making the game for.
Okay,
because
so
their controllers are just better generally.
Yeah, but it's not that they're better. It's just they're thinking about modes of play in different ways. And actually, I am genuinely interested to see what they do if they do this next generation tablet with NVIDIA. I would love to see what they could do with that. But I'm waiting. The trouble is, I want a tablet. I want a gaming device that's. If it's a tablet format,
Oscar, you just want everything. You just want everything. Just admit it. But I have another question because Oscar did kind of raise this and he's kind of got into it a little bit. So I'm just going to put it out there on the table and ask point blank. What is the game that, in your mind, in your opinion, has totally messed it up because they've done something specific, whether it's with the DLCs and the new storylines, whether it's they did an iteration of the franchise that just destroyed the franchise, whatever that thing is that they did that has ruined the game for you. Oscar, you obviously started with your opinion on this.
So many of these.
Name a different game that you think has done this.
Mario Kart. Mario Kart on the SNES was basically perfect, and since then it's just gone completely south. Like it's just not. I don't know. I think it's one of those things where like Mario Kart on the SNES is just so far removed from what Mario Kart's become. the N64 one was just such a massive. It made me so sad. It was like Nintendo had gone, oh, or maybe I'd misunderstood. I think maybe Mario Kart on the SNES was as good as they could possibly do a racing game, given the shonky constraints of the SNES. Right, everything's rectangular or square, and
such a professional term, shonky.
Well, and then as soon as the N64 came along, I think it's an interesting thing because I think Nintendo was stuck competing with the PlayStation, which was basically driving game central, right? And so they were like, well, we've got to have a proper racing game. So then Mario Kart on the SNES had been it was almost like a platform game with carts, right? And then on the N64 they gave it all these big, curving tracks and like bank corners, and it sort of, to me, that was what broke it. And I just think, and that, specifically, the thing that's made it the worst, even if you ignore the rest of the changes that they've made, is the blue shell with the spikes, man. What a utter... It's just fundamentally broken the game, I think.
Okay.
But anyway, I think Mario Kart's the one that's
Mario
the most...
Kart. Okay.
I've got about 4 or 5 of these.
Come on, Oscar. Hit us with the games that you...
So I could talk about Assassin's Creed. I could talk about Fallout series.
I want you to talk about Assassin's Creed because the movie's coming out, and I really want to talk about Assassin's Creed. So talk about Assassin's Creed. Come on, bring it.
Assassin's Creed 1, actually, as a concept, was perfect, but not fully fleshed out in terms of finishing. Therefore, it got a bit repetitive. Assassin's Creed 2 was brilliant, incredibly engaging, but just, again, too challenging in terms of it required you to do a certain number of tricks, and if you didn't have the reflexes to meet those tricks, you were actually stuffed.
Yes.
Then it comes Assassin's Creed 3, and it's absolutely bloody brilliant, and you haven't got these awful moments where you're basically, this is the first Assassin's Creed I finished. You actually had it so it worked, and you weren't caught out because you were stuffed because you didn't have the reflexes, and etc., etc. Then Black Flag comes along and adds pirate ships to it with the most amazing mini game I've ever played. Oh, it was just brilliant. All those ships I caught, I could send off on missions to do all sorts of things. Just perfect.
Okay.
Assassin's Creed Unity comes along.
And?
Crash. Oh my god. You've got, they did a few kind of liberties with the American history. Fine. I'll forgive that. But obviously, you're talking about French Revolution. There's so much potential here. I mean, Madame Tussauds, that's amazing. And yet, I look at the map and I cannot, for the life of me, remember what I'm supposed to do because there's 40,000 things I've got to do in this square inch. And they're all one variation of 6 identical things.
Okay.
And it's like, I've lost
too much
the
activity.
will to live.
Okay.
It's too much. It's not just too much activity, but they didn't really get me feeling like I was part of this, tale of two cities. That I feel that the Assassin's Creed 3 and Black Flag did beautifully. It's a marvelous achievement in so many ways, but I didn't care. And the same thing happened with Far Cry 4. I didn't care. Interestingly, though, Far Cry Primal, I adore, which is exactly the same map.
Okay. So
that's right.
I am curious, given that Assassin's Creed is going to become the movie that they're about to launch this movie with Michael Fassbender, what is your kind of take on the movie in terms of, I don't think there's been a truly brilliant movie version of any game so far. I mean, questionable.
I'd go further. I'd say there hasn't been anything that's not been dreadful. Really.
I was trying to be polite about this.
No, let's not be polite.
Okay.
Have you ever heard of the Dungeon Siege film starring Jason Statham?
I have!
And it's possibly the worst film I've ever seen.
Oh.
I had to watch it because it's Jason Statham and I had this thing for Jason.
I haven't watched the movie, but I was aware of it and I have heard some things about it, yeah.
He is called Farmer in it.
There was that Resident Evil game film. I didn't think that was entirely awful. I've seen worse films.
But it wasn't a kind of remake the premise of the game itself. It had its own. It had a plot intrinsic to it, didn't it?
Well, this is the thing. Because I think it's basically like you're hitting that whole a game is a system, right? Even the simplest games with only one solutions are still systems, right? And then in a story is like a linear. Even obviously there are non-linear stories with branching bits and dynamic stuff, but ultimately, like, a film is a specific linear narrative. It might be chopped up into bits and shuffled about, like Memento, but it's still fundamentally linear. I think it's more or less impossible to sort of capture a game in a film, really, because one is a doing thing and one is a watching thing. They're different verbs,
isn't it? I mean, surely the thing about these mediums is that they have different ways of telling the stories, and games are incredibly good at telling stories, but to put yourself in them.
Yeah, you be the story, right, in a game rather than.
But it's not impossible. It's genuinely, I'm sorry, I do feel really strongly about this, but I don't think it's impossible for a game narrative to be translated into a linear narrative and become a good movie. I just think that it requires some actual collaboration and some genuine talent to do that translation.
But how many game narratives are worth being in a film, though? Like, that's another question.
The point for me is you have to write for the medium.
Yeah.
That's the crux of it. And like I say, it's not that game story narratives are generally not like I was saying, they're not the most deep or profound, but that's fine. But you use the lore that they create as the lore behind the film that you make, and you build the story for the film in that lore.
That's the interesting piece, is because actually when we look at games and game designed narrative, actually most games have literally millennia worth of history when it comes to backstory and the kind of the wider canon of the story universe. There is always a huge heck of a ton of history around every game. I don't think I've ever worked for a game studio where I've walked into a game that I'm working on and somebody hasn't literally dumped a huge ring binder, or maybe 3 or 4 of them, and said, this is the backstory. This is the history of the game. And you're just sitting there going, oh, okay. That's a lot. But there's more canon and more backstory to most games than there will ever be for a single movie on its own.
And in some ways that's the problem, because then you have the exposition that the writers feel they have to do because the movie audience don't know the whole of the backdrop. But the smartest films are the ones where the knowledge of what the exposition is about is there, and we hinted it with these little moments. And if you want to find out about it, that's fine. But it all feels consistent because all we're doing is we're hinting at it using the kind of context that the people are viewing.
This is why I personally think Joss Whedon is so brilliant at what he does, is because actually if you look at things like Buffy the Vampire Slayer and you look at things like Firefly and Serenity, actually it was this fact that there was this sense that was never kind of thrust in your face, but this sense of consistency across the entirety of the TV show, that there was this broader universe from which he was drawing. And Firefly was a really great example of this, where he had this really subtle combination of kind of Asian culture that had seeped into this kind of cowboy western sci-fi, TV show. But it was never in your face that you needed to explain why there was this huge Asian culture. Yeah.
Exactly. It just made sense, because you can imagine that, the diaspora that kind of led to the kind of populating the US, is similar to what you could imagine happening on a later Earth, and their needs and their availability to tech and all that kind of stuff is going to vary depending on their access to resources. You can see this kind of Wild West thing happening again. It kind of makes inherent sense. And the fact that it's of a mixed culture is just brilliant. But there's very few shows that really try and do it that way. I mean, I think there's one called Killjoys at the moment, which is a Canadian-based one, which is starting it. It's not quite hit that kind of Firefly level, but hopefully we'll see a few more people doing, that kind of smart background lore seeping gently into the story.
Which brings me to... Go on, Alex.
Well, I think the thing with that is you have to sort of trust your audience, don't you, when you do it that way? Like, I think a lot of stuff, it will start off maybe with the best of intentions, and it will get in front of some exec who's like, I don't understand this, explain it. And you're watching the film, so you'll be watching the film or the TV show, and there'll be like this bit where they do that fifth business thing where, do you know what? This is that thing where the thing from the thing exploded the thing, and that's why we're doing this thing we're about to do. Okay, cool, thanks, let's do the thing. And it's like, in a good TV show, you don't need that. You sort of take it read, that the people are doing things for the reasons that make sense, and it sort of becomes apparent later, right?
Yeah.
And
So,
whereas the ones where you explain it are the ones that suck generally.
Generally.
Yeah.
So here's the thing I want to ask then. So Defiance, the TV show / game that for some strange reason never got advertised as both being a game and a TV show, even though it was one of the first to do it. What is the take on something like that, where there is this inherent partnership between, you know, like the guys at NBC Universal Sci-Fi and the guys at Tryon to build the game and the TV show alongside each other, and actually have a transmedia producer who's looking at how do these two things hinge together, and let's make sure the stories all make sense. What is the take on that? Something like that as an approach?
It's tough because I actually quite enjoyed the TV show, but there was definitely a gap between the pilot and the rest of the show. And it felt like, I mean, I didn't actually get to play the game, so that's the hard part. But it from what I saw of the game, and I saw a few screen grabs and stuff, it felt like the game was based on that opening episode. So I don't know. I find it. I think it's a very worthy thing, but again, I think this is the problem Alex mentioned earlier. Games are doing things, and stories are watching things, and there are lots of difficulties.
Yeah. So I think in principle, there's literally no reason why it shouldn't be a brilliant idea. So I've got a couple of friends who are Defiance obsessives, but I've literally I've no context for it whatsoever. I sort of knew it was a game / TV crossover thing, but I've never watched it or played it. But it seems to me that, like, if you did it well, you know, there's like lots of. So here's a really good example of why. I mean, this is bleedingly obvious, so feel free to tell me to shut up. It's like the thing in a game, doing versus seeing. It's like in a film or a book, right? You'll leave out the minute-to-minute detail because that's essentially irrelevant to the narrative and to the emotional journeys of the people. Usually, right? There's the occasional film where that's not the case or whatever, but that's. Whereas in the game, it's the millisecond by millisecond thing that makes it engaging, right? So a battle that you might in a film, it might be like a 30-second sequence. Or like someone sees it in flashback, right? Because you only need to see the salient points of it. That could be a whole 30-hour video game.
I do think there is this argument, though, to say that when it comes to like these creative franchise universes, that there is this possibility to have brilliant games and brilliant movies. And one of the only true examples of that in my mind, and again, I'm sure there are plenty of listeners who would disagree with me on this, but I'm gonna put it out there. I'm gonna say Star Wars. You know, the Star Wars movies versus Star Wars games, things like, you know, Battlefront. I actually think that it's possible to have a brilliant game and a brilliant movie as part of the same ecosystem, as part of the same universe. And I think people like Marvel and I think people like Star Wars are totally capable of it. But why is that not something that others can kind of get their head around, is my question. And I'm not being biased because I've worked on either of these franchises.
I wonder if it's finances. I wonder if it's their finance.
I think Oscar's. It's where the money comes from. I think in a lot of ways, it's like if you've got a game and they're trying to get their game pushed into film, you've instantly got the whole, like the people putting the money into the film want to see something that's more filmy than maybe the people who are making the game intended, and so that generally gets lost in translation. But then
Blizzard and Blizzard Studios, let's be honest, you know, movie wasn't exactly what I would call the best of movies when it comes to, you know, the game.
No, well, I don't know. I've never.
And they put a lot of money into that movie. Let's be fair.
No, yeah, well, yeah, but so maybe it's partly money and partly knowing what you're doing. I don't know. It's like most of the ones I've seen have been that sort of. They've sort of licensed. So like Activision, who I used to work for and have a lot of respect for, he says carefully. They're lovely people. They've got a lot of film licenses, and typically they're sort of a little bit generic copy and paste. You know, here's a popular way of doing a game. Let's glue this license onto it, sell it, done. Because it's got to hit a street date for a film, right? And so, and I think in many ways that's probably one of the reasons why it's such a tricky proposition, is that like video games sort of need a more sort of cyclical, you know, try it a little bit, go a little bit back, forward and backwards. And so although things do have street dates, in an ideal world to make a perfect game, you sort of need that to be slippable in order for it to be as good as it can be. Whereas typically with a film, it's like
you've got a date, you need it out. Yeah,
and you know, you wouldn't even take it into production if you weren't 100% convinced that what you had was going to work as a film. Do you know what I mean?
Yeah.
And so I think, you know, it's sort of I think it's a mixture of a lot of things. I think we haven't had somebody in charge of one of those things who has enough understanding of both sides of it to make it work.
I agree.
And I think
entirely.
that's the big problem, I think, really, with it. It's not that it can't work, I just think that it hasn't.
Okay, so here's the thing. I am aware that we have been babbling for almost an hour. So here's what I'm going to say. I want each of you to give us your pitch as to why people need to tune in to the 24-hour podcast marathon for special effects in October. And I'm going to start with you, Oscar.
So the whole point of this is that games have a special effect on the way people behave and feel and experience. And we are absolutely, so passionate, and we love the whole premise of making games and being part of the possibilities that games create. And we think that you guys in the audience should come and join us and hear what we have to say on all these different topics. And at the same time, you'll be helping us raise money for a fantastic charity.
Okay, and Alex, what's your pitch on this? Give us your pitch.
My pitch is we are going to be talking for 24 hours straight, basically us three at least. Not some other people.
Okay, you just made us promise that we're going to do it. Thanks.
I think it's, we're going to be more lucid at times, less lucid at times, and we should be. I think the basic idea is like special effects is an incredibly worthwhile charity. Like I only give money to 2 or 3 charities. One of them's cancer and stuff, because my dad died of it last year, and that's what it is. But like we give money to cancer charity, but special effects one of the only other charities that like seriously I give loads of money to whenever I can, because they transform people's lives. And what we're doing with this is really we're just going to talk about a lot of interesting / odd topics of conversation, and we're people who for whatever reasons have chosen to devote our lives to making video games. So on average, we should have some pretty interesting opinions / controversial opinions, and they're based on years of doing stuff. So I think people should tune in because special effects are awesome and it could be funny.
Okay.
That's what
I hope it'll be funny.
It will be good.
Funny / informative.
But Oscar, I'm going to put this responsibility on you, because we are going to get a lot of really interesting folk from the games industry to come and join us during this 24-hour podcast marathon. I'm asking you to make this interesting for our listeners, to promise to wring out of each and every guest at least one secret per guest.
Oh, we need secrets, deep, dark game development secrets.
We need the skinny on what's been going on behind the scenes. For all those people who are going to listen to us, we need the skinny. So you have to promise to get at least one secret from every person.
Promise to get at least one secret from every person. The key thing here is, guys, we just love this stuff, but we know that it has an important part to play in people's lives. And join us and listen to us and comment and get us to answer all sorts of questions as we go along as well. So it should be a laugh. We'll post up all the details as soon as we have them, so that everybody can be part of this process.
Awesome, wonderful. Thank you so much, guys. Just to assist our listeners in finding out a little bit more about what's going on, would you care to share with us your social media handle of choice, Alex?
Yes, I am at Darbatron on Twitter. Darbotron, that is, not Darbatron. I don't think there's a Darbatron. Twitter's the best way to follow me. I don't really do any other ones, I don't think.
And Oscar, what about you?
And I have the curious Twitter handle of Athanasius. That's ATHANATEUS. Means immortal. Don't ask me why.
Wonderful. Okay, so once again, this is for special effect in October. The power of play is incredibly important, and we want you to help us to raise funds for special effects. So I want to say thank you both for joining us today. I want to say thank you to our audience for listening. And remember, if you enjoy this content, don't forget to subscribe and review. And follow us on Twitter at Digital Jam Ltd.
digitaljamsessions.com